The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that felt alive, pressing into the skin of everyone sitting there, a silence broken only by the scribble of pens, the shuffle of papers, and the uneven breaths of a 7-year-old girl clutching an old teddy bear as though it were her shield against the world. Her name was Emily, small and fragile yet carrying an intensity in her eyes that few adults ever knew, and in those wide brown eyes was written a story of loss, courage, and hope. So raw it pierced the hearts of strangers. Her father Daniel stood at the front, shackled in cold iron handcuffs, his face pale with worry yet proud, his gaze drawn again and again toward his daughter like a compass pointing home. He was accused of a crime he insisted he hadn't committed, a charge that threatened to lock him away for decades, a weight heavier than death itself, and though the lawyers battled fiercely, tossing evidence and words like weapons, the scales seemed tilted against him. At the high bench sat Judge Margaret Holloway, a woman whose reputation was built on strength, precision, and decisions as sharp as a blade. She was admired, feared, respected, a figure of law whose very posture demanded silence, but what no one in that grand courtroom knew, what she kept hidden behind robes and authority, was that she too carried chains of her own, chains not of iron but of flesh, disease eating quietly at her body, an incurable illness the doctors had told her would eventually win, and while the world saw an unbending woman of power, inside she was fragile, human, exhausted. Every night after work she would sit alone in her large house, her medicine bottles lined like soldiers on the counter, her hand pressing against the ache in her bones, a reminder that beneath the robe she was mortal, breakable, and desperately afraid. The trial went on with the usual rhythm of legal rituals, until one moment shattered it all. During a heated testimony Emily suddenly rose from her seat, too small to command attention yet somehow the entire room stilled. Her little voice trembled but carried across the walls, "Please, Your Honor, free my dad and I'll heal you." At first there was stunned silence, then scattered laughter, the kind of nervous laughter adults release when confronted with something they cannot process. Lawyers tried to hush her, bailiffs moved, but the judge lifted her hand, stopping them, curiosity flickering across her eyes. "Heal me," she repeated softly, almost amused, and the gallery chuckled because what could a child possibly mean? What power could a little girl hold over sickness or justice? Yet Emily stood firmer, clutching her teddy bear, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered, "I can see your pain, you don't have to be afraid, I can help." Those words landed like a thunderclap inside the judge, striking a place so buried she nearly gasped. Because how could this child know? No one knew, not even her closest colleagues, yet in those innocent words she felt exposed, as though her secret illness had been laid bare. She dismissed court early that day, retreating to her chambers, but she could not shake the image of that fragile girl staring at her with certainty. Outside the courthouse the story exploded, headlines splashed across newspapers, child promises to heal judge to save father. Television anchors debated between calling it childish fantasy or divine sign, social media split between mockery and wonder, and though many dismissed Emily as desperate or delusional, there were voices whispering about miracles, about how children sometimes carried truths beyond reason. Judge Holloway tried to bury herself in work, yet at night as pain clawed through her body she would remember those words, "I can see your pain," and they terrified her more than the illness itself. Daniel in his prison cell wept when he heard the news, guilt burning in him that his little girl had been dragged into his nightmare. But deep inside he too felt a strange stirring because he knew Emily. He had seen her place her tiny hand on her grandmother during a heart attack and keep her alive until paramedics arrived. He had watched her comfort neighbors in grief with words she shouldn't have known. He had felt her presence lighten the heaviest rooms. He always knew his daughter was different, touched by something beyond this world. And though he never spoke it aloud for fear people would call her strange, he believed in her gift. The trial pressed forward. Witnesses testified, lawyers argued, evidence mounted, yet the real focus of the courtroom was no longer the case but the little girl sitting silently each day, her presence like a flame in the shadows. People began to watch her more than the proceedings, and even the judge found her gaze drifting toward Emily when no one was looking. Nights became heavier for Judge Holloway. She tried to deny it but the child's words echoed in her mind. Her sickness seemed sharper now as though her body itself responded to being seen. One evening after court she returned home, dropped her robe on the chair, stood in front of her mirror, pressed her hand against her ribs where pain throbbed and whispered bitterly, heal me? A child? She nearly laughed but tears welled instead, and for the first time in years the great judge allowed herself to sob, not as a figure of authority but as a woman terrified of dying alone. Outside the trial, Emily's story spread like wildfire. Strangers gathered outside the courthouse holding signs, some with prayers, some with mockery, and the world seemed to split between faith and skepticism, but Emily remained unchanged, attending each day with her grandmother, her teddy bear in her lap, her eyes wide with unshakable hope. One afternoon during a tense hearing, Emily suddenly swayed and collapsed in her seat. The room gasped, her grandmother screamed, the judge without hesitation slammed the gavel and rushed from her bench, surprising everyone. They carried Emily to a side chamber, pale and trembling, whispering faintly, "I just saw too much pain." The judge herself knelt beside her, taking her small hand in hers, and when Emily's eyes fluttered open she whispered weakly, "You don't have to be afraid. I can help you if you believe." The judge felt something strange, warmth spreading from that tiny hand, a flicker of light in her weary body. She pulled back quickly, shaken, dismissing it outwardly but inwardly haunted. Later that night she found herself on the internet searching for stories she once mocked, tales of children with healing gifts, cases of faith-defying medicine. She hated herself for it. She was a woman of logic and law, but the memory of Emily's touch burned in her hand like an ember that refused to die, and for the first time she whispered in the dark, "What if